que mas romantic.
Hello and welcome to Skimo Gold. This is the premier podcast and YouTube show for ski mountaineering interviews and race analysis. I'm your host, Travis Macy. We're departing a bit today from our usual routine and bringing you an interview with an author and journalist. This is Devon O'Neil, based in Breckenridge, Colorado. He's a well-established journalist in the outdoor and adventure and sports psychology spaces. His work is excellent. It's been in big publications and websites all over the place for a long time. I met Devon over 20 years ago when I was a young athlete, and he was a young journalist who had been assigned a story about our adventure racing team, Team Spider. And it's been a pleasure to stay in touch with him on and off over the years, to read many of his stories and to learn from him, and especially to learn from him through his new book. It's called The Way Out. I highly recommend this book. It's a book that, boy, it made me think, it made me reflect, it made me laugh, it made me cry many times. And it's really well done. It was a hard book to write. It took Devon well over 7 years of committed work, and it's a deep and challenging story to tell. And it's related to our subject here, Skimo. It's based in a story about a backcountry hut trip, which is, of course, an activity that many of us enjoy. So I think you'll find it relevant. Hats off to Devon for a great job on this project again, which was a significant task over many years. And I think he did a great job with it. The research is fantastic to me. It has kind of the depth of research plus the storytelling that we might find in an author like John Krakauer. And that's a big compliment. So Devon, way to go. Boy, I also want to say thanks to the Salida community. This is a place that my family and I have called home for 6 years now. This is Salida, Colorado, a small town in south central Colorado. And Salida is at the epicenter of this book, and the Salida community. I think Devon did a good job of capturing the fantastic community and human connection and outdoor culture that we love and appreciate here. And I want to give a personal thanks to some of the families in this book, especially the Beasley family. That to me just provides a great example of navigating the loss of a family member, and persevering and grappling with that. And it seems to me coming out whole and happy and strong, and it really inspires me. I'm going through the process of losing my own dad to Alzheimer's at the end of a long and challenging journey. And like the families in this book, my connection with my dad has often been based on time outside in the mountains together. And so seeing these families of course go through incredible hardship, but also persevere, and seeing many of these people, I think, doing well now later in life, it really it inspires me. So thank you. Um, that's about enough from me now. Thanks to, as always, to our host, or excuse me, our sponsor, Camp. Appreciate you guys making this podcast happen. More about Camp when we get to the mid episode ad. All right, that's about enough from me. Let's roll, folks. It's time for Skimo Gold. Hello, Devon, and welcome to the podcast. It's fantastic to be here with you today. I'm excited to discuss your book, The Way Out, and also your life as a writer and as an adventurer. I'm particularly excited to be having this conversation today on April 2nd, where I happen to be going out this afternoon on a backcountry hut trip. We would typically call it a ski trip. There's not much snow right now. I don't know if I'm going to be skiing or hiking or trudging through slush, but we shall see. And Devin, your book has been on my mind because the hut I'm going to, it's pretty close to home. It's an easy approach. Like I said, there's not much snow. I don't even know if we can ski. So one side of me is saying like, hey, this is pretty straightforward and casual fun, etc. And I'm thinking back to your book, The Way Out, and remembering like, wow, even in places that we see as easy to get to and pretty straightforward, that may not be the case. So I need to, I need to be focused on fun and connection and time out there with my friends, and also just diligent. And that's one thing your book has reminded me of. The book also, Devin, it really has stuck with me. It made me reflect, think, cry, connect, pause, and ponder. And it's a powerful reading experience. I really liked the book, Devin. So great work and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Travis. Which hut are you going to?
We are going to the Lost Wonder Hut, and I know that you, well, as it says in your bio, and you've mentioned to me, you're one of the guys who goes up there. I guess you use a big stick and you stir around, the toilet area, we'll call it. You do other things to maintain the huts. Do you go to Lost Wonder Hut often, or do you have certain ones that you oversee?
No, just Summit huts. So we have 5 in Summit County. Francie's, Janet's, Section House, Ken's cabin, and Sister's cabin. And actually, we don't use a stick. We use, or I prefer, a long pitchfork to stir the
Mm.
excrement. It's
Yep.
in the compost toilet vault. That works really
Yep.
well. You can really grab big clumps of it.
Mm-hmm. All
TMI.
right. Nice. I like it. And this is, I mean, hey, listeners, if you've ever been to one of these, if you haven't been to a backcountry hike, you probably think we're crazy. If you have, you will know that if, the pile of so-called excrement is not stirred around, you get this frozen cone of,
Yeah.
solids coming up, and they can almost be touching you. They may be touching you as you sit on that toilet in Five Below at at 6 a.m. Well, that's Devin. That's awesome. What that job? How many trips are you making? Per winter, and are you doing it in the summer as well?
Not the summer. It's just a winter gig for me. We have one hut master at each hut every week, and um I've done as many as 15 trips in a winter. Um, Now with kids and all the things, it's more like 8, but I love it. It's a really cool getaway on um on the clock in a strange way, and yeah, it gets you to a cool place. It's solo travel, which is always, I think, cathartic for us in the backcountry. And yeah, there are pluses and minuses of every job. That's why work's a 4-letter word.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, so speaking of kids and all the things, Devin, I'm thinking back, as I recall, I believe you and I met about 20 years ago. We were both recently out of college. We were, as I recall, hard charging young guys in the mountains, excited about getting out there. As I think back, I probably had some decisions with adventures and excursions that were maybe questionable, and it ended up being okay. But looking back, I could have made better choices in terms of whether it's gear, route, timing, whatever. A lot of us have many of those. Devin, let's hear a little about your background. You know, what should we know about you before that point as a young man, and what should we know about you in the last 20 years leading up to you know, this big book that came out in December?
Yeah, those were glory days, Travis. You were on the adventure racing circuit. I was a cub reporter. I grew up in the Virgin Islands. I went to college in Vermont, and my grandpa was in the 10th Mountain Division out here in Colorado,
Mm,
and I never got to meet him because he died while my mom was pregnant with me and my twin brother. And so we just stopped for a night in Breckenridge in 2002, and I've never left. I've been there ever since, and have been a journalist in some form for that entire time almost. Worked a couple odd jobs, but um, yeah, I think a lot of what I've done career wise led to the publication of this book in terms of understanding, how to report, how to write, and how to really try and treat sources the way that you would want to be treated if you were going to ask them to be telling you, in a lot of ways, very hard stories. And this book was something that became really personal for me and became a huge part of my life, and something I worked on, as you know, for about 6 years in total. And um, I have two kids, still live near Breckenridge, 10,200 feet, and love to get out and do all the things that I wrote about in this book, and that people were gracious enough to share their perspectives on. And I know that you live a very similar life in Salida, and it's very full, and yeah, just kind of really like a meaningful version of how to spend our fleeting time on this planet. And yet it is
hmm
fleeting, and that's a big part of the story that is in The Way Out. Is doesn't matter how benign, how quick or easy you think something might be, you kind of have to prepare in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable and don't come naturally, but they can allow you then to, drop your guard and enjoy the experience a lot more if you are prepared enough for something unexpected to go wrong. And certainly reporting this book, you're familiar with the story, of course, but it changed me in ways that sometimes I didn't anticipate. Made me
mm,
realize how unprepared I was when I thought I was actually prepared, and it changed my view of. And I know we're going to get into this later, but what I want out of my time in the outdoors. And those, I think it's done that for a lot of readers. I've heard from a lot of people who have read this and said similar things. And that was certainly part of why I wrote it, was to get people thinking about what they want out of life and how to go about it.
mm. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's done all of that for me for sure, Devin. And thank you for sharing about your grandfather. What a neat way, as you said, you didn't get to meet him in person, but I can just imagine being in these huts, you know, that were part of his experience at a important time in his life and in history. What a neat way to connect with his spirit. That's really cool. Do you ever kind of, I don't know, feel him out there, think about him and stuff?
I talked to him. Yeah, his name was Robert Irving O'Neill, but he
Mhm.
went by Snuffy, and he was a very
Mm,
well known. He was part of the mountain training group in the 10th Mountain Division, so more on the mountaineering expertise side, and would train troops in those disciplines of what they were doing. And he was also an artist. So when he got
wow.
out of the 10th Mountain Division, he lived in Aspen and taught skiing in Aspen in the 40s, and got married in the Hotel Jerome, famous building there. And
Yeah.
in his artwork, his caricatures of all these local people and former soldiers that he served with hung in this very famous bar in Aspen called the Red Onion for years and years, like decades, literally.
Yeah.
And I've been spending more time in Aspen of late, and a lot of the people I'm talking to are very old school Aspenites, and they remember his artwork well. And certainly, like, his spirit lives inside. I have photos of him on my wall, and those guys pioneered this life that we're so lucky to lead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Created this idea that the mountains were awesome, and you could build a life around playing in them, albeit taking care of business, while you're doing that. But I think of him all the time. He's a big inspiration for me, and I so wish that I got to meet him and ski with him and hear him tell his stories, but it's okay.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Thanks for sharing that, Devin. That's really cool. Well, let's go from Aspen to maybe we could call it the poor Aspen of the South, and that's Salida, Colorado. I moved to Salida 6 years ago. I grew up in Evergreen, and feel super thankful to be here. I'm just so glad that my kids get to grow up here. I thought we were coming for mostly for the outdoors, and I realized the community is really why we are here. Devin, tell us about Salida. What were your preconceptions about Salida? What did you learn about Salida? I know for me, in addition to the plot and the character development in your book, one thing I loved was just history of Salida, especially in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and the changes in the place over time, which is still going, it's happening in all these towns, right? People come in from outside. I was an outsider, I don't know, maybe I'm a local now, maybe not. Depends on who you ask, right? What do you think about Salida, Devin?
Yeah, I've been going to Salida for many years. It's about an hour and 20 minutes away from where I live, south, warmer in the Banana Belt. And I've been going there to ride bikes and hang out and just be for so long. It's got that amazing vibe to it. Um, and yet, what I didn't understand, what I didn't grasp was how tight, how amazingly strong that community is that you're now surrounded by. And I mean, I've been covering issues, people, things in mountain towns in Colorado specifically since I moved to the state. So almost 24 years ago now. And I have never come across a place with it as tight knit of a community as Salida. And it served a number of purposes in my reporting. You know, certainly I was vetted heavily by the locals in Salida and people certainly involved with this story, and very sensitive, delicate story, which I respected and still do. And that was fine with me. You know, I wanted people, if they were going to be comfortable talking to me, to really feel comfortable, not have
Yeah.
me, try and push my way in or convince anyone of anything. And so people would vet me. They would call two or three friends and make sure those people who I had spoken with already thought I was okay. And I never have any problem with that when I'm working on something. Um,
Yeah.
and it's so close knit. And I think that's because for so long, while these other towns were blowing up, Breckenridge is a great example. Locals couldn't live within the town limits anymore. You know, they got priced out a lot earlier than in Salida. And so Salida,
Hmm.
as you know, it's a grid. It's like laid out in this way that people can just walk or ride their cruiser bikes to each other's houses in a matter of 30 seconds to like 5 minutes everywhere. And I think that bred this amazing community. And a lot of them got there around the same time. You know, everybody kind of lands in a place different times or whatever. But in terms of the people that I got to speak with, a lot of them did get there in this formative stage of this town when it kind of went from this like real boarded up windows, kind of no life in it, old toilet in the yard kind of place to a place with life and this vibrant
Hmm.
downtown culture and feel and community and fun hangouts, and everybody was at similar stages of their lives with exceptions of course, but in general everyone was still coming of age as the town was coming of age, and that bred this shared experience, and it bonds people when they go through a shared experience at a formative stage of their lives. And I found that to be really salient and powerful in Salida. And yet everyone is really committed to the outdoor life and doesn't sit around. You know, there's like, I mean, like any cool mountain town, there's a million things you can do in a given day. You never have time to do them all. And I think that that bred a bit of restlessness as well in people, and they
Mm.
explored and challenged themselves in healthy ways. So, like we all do when we're growing into who we're going to be. Um, and yeah, I think. The other thing about Salida is when something bad happens, and it's happened a lot to that community,
Hmm.
well, people come together and they support each other, and there is this kind of enveloping of those who are hurting. And I found that to be especially poignant in this story. And it mattered a lot to try and capture that too. Just this like true, somebody put it to me as like when a bluebird is sick or hurting or something, all the other bluebirds like
Mm.
surround that one bird and really care for it. And I found that to be pretty similar in the way that folks responded and have responded to hard things in Salida when someone's died or a parent's died or
Yep.
all kinds of hard stuff.
Yeah. Oh wow! Thanks for sharing all that, Devin. That seems like an accurate characterization to me, and and I'm even reflecting. This particular story. It happened a few years before I moved here. I now know and tangentially know many of the people listed in the book, and it's an interesting view, and it is an incredible place. And I think, yes, there's the wonder of just I mean, if I'm feeling, disconnected or lonely or whatever, I literally walk downtown and I know I'm going to see 10 people I know, and I just loiter for an hour
Mhm.
and, high fives, hugs, smiles, and it's great. And I do think, and the book kind of touches on this, sometimes there can be, a potential for FOMO, or this sense of like, to be part of the community. We need to do the family raft trips, or, the whatever, maybe the younger single person, I gotta get out there on the bike rides, the skis, whatever. And it can also be hard maybe for the child or the teenager or the spouse or whoever that maybe isn't as drawn to the outdoor pursuits and maybe finds life in other ways. And that's something, you touch on in the book as well. So, nothing's ever perfect. It's always dynamic. And I think, Devin, your book, to me, it captures a lot of the dynamism, even in terms of, key characters, like Brett Beasley. I didn't know the guy. Reading the book, I thought like, wow, this guy I think would have been my friend. Like, I'm really drawn to his personality, his character. The way he goes about work and fatherhood and adventure. This is someone I'd love to be around, and like all of us, everything wasn't absolutely um, perfect. So good job embracing that dynamism. I've talked to, people, or not many people, but a few around town. Our mutual friend Chris Thompson. He kind of introduced me to your book. I talked to a couple of Brett's friends who, reflected on, they didn't know the details of the story, and being able to read this book allowed some of it to just an explanation. I happened to run into Chuck McKenna, who's one of the heroes of the story and probably one of the heroes of Salida. And, he seemed happy with how the book came out, which I think is an incredible compliment. So let's get into the story here, Devin. We've built it up enough. What is the background of the story of The Way Out? What did you hear initially? What pulled you in? And then, tell us as much as you want about the book itself.
Yeah, so it centers on a hut trip, as you discussed in your intro here. It was a hut trip to Uncle Bud's near Leadville. It's one of the 10th Mountain huts, one of the most popular huts in Colorado. It's in the middle of the Sawatch Range. 11,380 feet is where the hut is perched. And this was a trip in January of 2017 that three families from Salida, so three dads and their four teenage kids, took. It was intended to be a family bonding trip. And they got up there just before this massive storm was forecast to move in. It had been, the forecast was not known by everybody in the world, but those around Leadville knew that a big storm was coming in. But because of where Salida is, and it's 3,000 feet lower than Leadville and whatnot, it hadn't been forecast the same way in Leadville, or at least those who were on this trip weren't expecting a Whopper. And so Brett, who was one of the three dads, Brett was a longtime U.S. Forest Service employee, the snow ranger for the whole Salida Ranger District, 440,000 acres of forest. He and the 15-year-old son of another dad, whose name was Joel Shaler, the boy was Cole Walter Shaler. They ducked out for a quick powder run their first morning at the hut, and they just never came back. And they hadn't told anybody that they were doing that. Everybody else was kind of still finishing breakfast, getting geared up that morning, and they intended to go for this quick run and come back and rejoin their group, and then everybody would kind of do their thing together. And they never returned to the hut, and Cole's dad, Joel, and sister Morgan went out and tried to follow their tracks and catch up to them. And they saw where the tracks went, but decided not to follow them when they descended in a direction that they didn't anticipate. And late that afternoon, as the storm was really beginning to whistle and howl and do all the things that a sideways blizzard can do, they ultimately ended up calling for help. They called 911. The Lake County Search and Rescue Team was alerted. They just, due to the storm and there was kind of some squishy information exchanged, they decided not to deploy until the following morning. And so Brett and Cole spent that night out in a place where nobody knew where they were. And, the storm was like covering up tracks really quickly. It was just one of those, it was a massive snow event. And I still remember skiing this storm in January of 2017. It was two significant waves over a period of 10 days. It doubled the area's snowpack depth. And the following day, dozens of people, friends of the families, showed up to help search from Salida. And, there's a foot or 2 feet of snow on all the roads. Travel was incredibly difficult. Lake County Search and Rescue Team was there as well that morning. And there was a little bit of friction between the civilians who had showed up to search and the government search team, and pretty poor coordination between all the people. There were 3 different radio frequencies used in the field, so not everybody could talk to everybody, and it was chaotic. And early on that second afternoon, 2 of the civilians who had showed up, so Chris Baran, who's known as the Michael Jordan of snowmobiling, he owns a guiding operation just north of Buena Vista, and his top guide, Chase Bunting, kind of went off on their own to be more efficient in their search. And they found Brett and Cole that second day, and they were separated by then, and only one of them survived. And, that the event just rocked the community. Any lone survivor story is just really difficult and kind of unto itself in so many ways. And in this case, there were just a lot of questions as to what had happened.
Mhm.
And I heard about this actually from our mutual friend, Chris Thompson. We bumped into each other at a bluegrass show in Frisco almost 2 years later. And he told me the kind of skeleton version of this. And he was like, he knows that I'm a journalist and has read my stories. And he's like, I think you might want to look into this. And so I started to do so. And yet the survivor wasn't ready to talk about it. And I understood and respected that, and just ended up sitting on this for 3 years, and finally did get a chance to speak with him. And that really opened the door then to pursuing this in full.
Yeah. Wow, thanks for sharing that, Devin. Well, one of the things that stands out to me in your writing process is patience, and as you said, sensitivity. I mean, I can only imagine this, just the weight of carrying this story, of getting into it, of as you said, wanting to tell it as well as you can, as honestly as you can. It's a big task, and I think you did a great job with it. Let's talk more about those first meetings with Cole. So in when this event occurs, Cole was 15. I mean, I have shivers saying that because my son is 15, and he's an excited, athletic, hard charging kid, and I can just imagine him charging out there, without thinking, going alone, following his friends, following whatever, some adults, and it just, yeah, it gives me shivers. But anyway, it's what, 7 years later, where I think there's a scene in the book. You sit down with Cole in Alpine Park. It's 2 blocks away from my house, and you're sitting on the bench and you're starting to talk. And then over time, you're going with him to the hut, to Porcupine Gulch. Sitting with him on chairlifts. I don't know.
Yeah.
It sounds like you guys probably know each other really well. I'm sure you have a very deep relationship. I can imagine probably this process has been, a lot of Cole's journey in healing, reflecting, whatever you might call it. What can you say about that? And was that Cole being ready to talk with you? Was that kind of, in some ways, raising the flag? Hey, let's pursue this story.
Yeah, absolutely. After 3 years, I got back in touch with Joel, who I'd written a letter to initially in early, 2019. And Joel had informed me, "My son's just not ready to talk about this. I appreciate your interest, but, not now," basically. And so after 3 years, I got back in touch with Joel, and I didn't hear from Joel, but I did get an email from Cole, and he said basically, "I think I'm ready to talk about this." And so we actually
Yeah.
met on the 5-year anniversary of the accident and of
Wow.
Brett's birthday. And, neither of us realized it because we had just been trying to figure out, like, okay, does Monday work for you? Does when, we weren't fixated on the dates. And I was driving
Yeah.
home that day after we had spoken for 3 hours. And Cole by then was 20. So he had been 15 at
Hmm.
the time of this hut trip. He had just lost his mom 7 months before this hut trip. That's how this trip began, was Joel wanting to get his kids back into the backcountry, which they did as a family for a long time. Cole was this amazing woman, Lori Walters. She was on the U.S. Whitewater team, and she died of cancer pretty young. And
Hmm.
it rocked their family, understandably. And um, when I met Cole, he was again like 5 years removed from the accident, 5.5 from his mom's death, and he was in college in at Montana State in Bozeman. He was home for break over winter break, and I got a glimpse into what he had been through and how he had processed this. He did a lot of it on his own, which is why it worried so many people around him, because they were not sure he was processing it and not sure he was going to
Mm.
be okay if he didn't emote to them. And I was pretty impressed by already like where he seemed to be in his processing and in his kind of healing from this trauma. But that first meeting just really scratched the surface. And yes, you are correct. Cole and I got to know each other really well. And I always try and let people see me if I'm going to ask them hard questions and hopefully get to see
Yeah.
them in full, And Cole's a really impressive young man. Um, a lot of people, as I mentioned, like were really concerned about him because they didn't see his processing happening in front of them. And he didn't like
Mm.
talking about this. And I think anybody who's been through something traumatic can relate to that. It's hard. How do you bring it up?
Yeah.
How do you answer questions, especially to your loved ones? And yeah, we got to spend a lot of time over a period of almost 4 years. And we skied together and we rode them on our crest together. And we just sat on benches and talked for hours at a time in various places. And Cole, when people would say, so you've been talking to Cole, how's he doing? And I would
Mm.
say, maybe I'm missing something because I still have only known him a relatively short time in the grand scheme of things, but I think he's doing well. He struck me as
Mm.
someone who had a really strong handle on himself and his feelings and what he wants out of life and what he's been through. And those things hardened him, those experiences, but um, they never broke him, I guess is the best way to put it. And
Mm.
I did see some other folks in this story who were like still just ravaged by this thing many years later. And
Yeah.
Cole was in a pretty good place overall. And yet he still struggled with all the things that are understandable for a lone survivor. Two go in, one comes
Yeah.
out alive.
Yeah.
Can't make that crap up. And he was worried about about being judged, and he
Hmm.
carried a lot of guilt for having lived when Brett didn't, and wondered if it was his fault that Brett hadn't lived because he had,
Yeah.
because Cole had, and yet there really wasn't a reason. I tried to impress that on him, as a dad, just to I felt for him. I felt for everybody in this
Yeah.
book. I mean, Brett's family as well. They're super strong people, amazing people. I was so impressed by the strength of so many people in this book, and it's uncommon. And I do think that it is a product of the Salida community and of these families. They raise their kids to be really strong people, and I guess over time I got to see Cole much more as a man than a kid. But I never forgot
Hmm.
that at the time of this accident, he was a boy who had just
Yeah.
lost his mom, a boy who didn't know how to act, what to say in the wake of something like this. And I just, I mean, I remain very impressed by him.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing all that, Devin. And it's very clear to me listening to you that this is more than just a book for you. Like this is you, and this is your work in the world, connecting with people, making a difference, taking something seriously. And I think there's something to be said for that, and I know from writing books, like it's very hard to, go big or have a huge payday with writing a book. Sometimes that happens, but this it's clear to me this journey for you is a lot more than that. Yeah, and that's a huge, like you said, 7 years of your life you've been grappling with this thing. That's a chapter of your own life. Big thanks to Camp for supporting the Skimo Gold podcast. I've been using Camp products for almost 2 decades now. Ski mountaineering, adventure racing, trail running, and multi-sport adventures. I love the packs. Been using them for Skimo for a long time. Probably my favorite current Camp pack is the Outback 20. Camp packs have all the features you need and none of the junk that you don't. Check them out. Camp. Thanks again for supporting the podcast, guys. What else should we know about your writing process? You say in the book that you wrote a lot of it sitting in huts, on trips. Maybe you go out, stir that pooper around and then go in the hut, do some writing. What else should we know about your process? It is incredibly detailed, Devin, and I'm sure you have thousands of things that could have been added, that weren't in the book because of time or people's preference or whatever. It reminds me of John Krakauer, Into the Wild, Into Thin Air, that type of detailed nonfiction narrative. It's really impressive. So how did you go about the writing briefly?
Thanks. Yeah, it's something that I've tried all these things over the years. I didn't go to school for writing or journalism. I kind of fell into it. I played sports in college and really wanted to keep somehow covering sports. So I was a sports editor at a newspaper, which is when we met back in the day. And then I've just tried to like figure out what version of this craft works for me. So
Mm,
I used to write stuff without an outline. I would just like read through my notes like 10 times and then sit down and write. And I would go back and grab verbatim quotes and pull them in when I needed. But otherwise, it was just kind of coming from my head and a bit of a stream of consciousness. And as you get doing longer, more in depth, kind of more nuanced things, um, I now have a very specific outlining process where I'll kind of write a
mm,
so I for this book, I forget what I had, like, it was, I think, like 1,200 pages of single space, 12-point font typed notes in a document and, some like 400,000 words or something like that. And, I would go through all that and pare it down, kind of eliminate
mm.
stuff that was either redundant or definitely wasn't going to be material for the book because it didn't fit or whatever. It's extraneous. And then from there, I would do that again and try and get it even a little more tight. but you still have an enormous amount of material there. And then and then I at least outline, kind of skeletally, chapter. You're kind of trying to basically decide how this story should be told structure wise. Like, should this come before that? Should that set that next thing up? And how best will the story flow and also the power be maximized? And after I
Mm,
have a real skeleton of an outline, then I start filling in. I start going through all the material and deciding where that piece of that story, that anecdote, that quote, whatever, that theme might fit. And I start plugging things in. It's very rough. And then eventually I polish that once everything's plugged in. And that, eventually I get to the end of the material and I'm like, well, all this stuff didn't get plugged in anywhere. It's gone. So you're
mm,
kind of cutting, you're narrowing it all the while. And eventually you have an outline. But just to do what I just described before I ever like actually wrote a word of this book, that was 2 weeks of full-time work just to pare it down basically and get this
yeah.
outline to any semblance of a place where I can then write from. And all yeah, to your question or point, all that stuff was happening at huts. I have 10 and 7-year-old sons at home, and I have to wash dishes, I have to help, I have to do a lot of things, and you just can't be as efficient and productive at home as you can when you're sitting at 11,400 feet with a solar inverter that you can charge your computer on and a tiny little box that we call a Hutmaster quarters. And
Hmm.
that was my like writing shed. And it was a number of different huts, but I would get 12 to 15 hours of writing done per day at the huts. And that's just so much more efficient than sitting at home and like getting 3 hours at a time or whatever. You kind of need big
Mm,
blocks of time to write.
yeah.
And I know you can relate to that. So yeah, I would usually for a Hutmaster shift, we have the Hutmaster quarters signed out for us for 3 nights, albeit in the preceding like 5 years. I had stayed in the Hutmaster quarters 0 nights because it's a little
Mm.
gluttonous to go up there and tell your family that you need to stay at a Hutmaster quarters to do your job. No, I can do that in a day and be home and still help that night at
Yeah.
home. So I would then though I started taking all 3 of those nights and really spending about 4 days up at the huts. And one time I spent 4 nights when I really had to get a lot done. But I would come out of those and just feel like I was getting somewhere. And so I
Mm,
spent 30 nights at huts the winter that I wrote the first draft of this book. And albeit that first draft was 90,000 words, it got cut down to, I think this book ultimately published at about 67,000. So we eliminated um, about 30% of that first draft. And it needed
yeah.
that. It needed more focus. It needed fewer tangents. It needed less overlap. Everybody who had given me their time and told me their stories made an impact on me. So I kind of then inherently wanted to include them, wanted to pay tribute to them. And there was a lot of
Mm,
overlap. There were a lot of similar stories, a lot of powerful emotional moments with big, strong, hard men. And so some of that stuff got cut and it breaks your heart. They call it murdering your darlings. I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's hard. You
I
work,
know the
work for
feeling.
years to
Yeah.
get the information and you're moved by it and you want to include it and it doesn't all fit. So that's part of the process though. And once I got it down, so once I submitted that first draft, then we had to make some changes and I kind of rewrote the last 40% of that book in some form. And
Wow.
I kind of got to this place. I was constantly though wary of how am I going to do this? Because when people share something really powerful and intimate and personal that moves you, simultaneously, that stuff's vulnerable. It creates a vulnerability in the book, and you want to show someone in full, like Brett, for instance. We see a lot of his character, and some of it
Hmm.
is his fallibility, and that's hard to put in a book like this, where it's already an intense story and where there's already some real delicate parts. And so I would be excited, but also really scared because
Yeah.
I didn't want to, perpetuate anybody's pain who had been through a lot of healing and made a lot of progress in the years since this accident. And yet, true stories are just really hard. I ended up leaning on truth in so many ways as kind of this bedrock principle. Like, if it's true and it's
Mm.
relevant to the story, then it needs to be in there. And if it's true but not relevant, then it doesn't. But
Yep.
I tried to have that kind of be the delineation. And yet, the truth hurts in so many ways. And so I was really sensitive to that and worried about that, and yet tried to get to a place where I felt like I had honored the people in the book, not hung anyone out to dry, and yet told a story that would move people, because I think there's so much power in the strength that we see in the characters in this book and in this story, and the real people walking the streets still. I mean, these are people still living their lives, and this was my
Hmm.
first full length real hard book, and I struggled with that a lot and fretted for a long time. But I got to this place at the end of one night at the hut, and I'd just finished the second draft, and it was like after midnight, and I finally was like, I feel like I've done the best that I possibly can, and that was like a weird moment in my life, but
Yeah.
it felt like I could exhale for the first time in a long time.
Yeah. Wow. Man, thanks for sharing all that, Devin. Yes, folks, writing takes work. And again, the book is The Way Out. Devin, I just imagining you up there in the huts doing your writing. Not only is it focused work time, away from distractions, I can only imagine that that must be helpful in terms of just being in the spirit, the essence of nature and of a hut trip and what it feels like and what it's like to be out there.
I
It
should
just it
say,
sounds so appropriate.
yeah, it felt that, and I forgot, when my computer would run out of battery, I would take it down to like 4%. I wasn't willing to go in. I'm constantly saving, but I didn't bring like
Yeah,
an external
yeah.
hard drive or something. So I was, of course, always worried that what I had just done would be lost or something. But
Yeah.
I would then plug the computer into the inverter and let it charge for like an hour and a half to 2 hours was what it needed to get back up to 100%. And then I would just go ski, and I would do
Yeah.
these runs out of the hut. And like, that was my kind of go make sense of it all, think about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, just like a little bit of an internal debrief that was built
Yeah.
into the process. And it
Yep.
wasn't like, it was recreational, and it was kind of this balancing part of the time there, but it was essential too.
Mm, wow. Well, as we wrap it up, Devin, here in our final few minutes, I'm thinking of Carl Jung, who is someone you refer to in the book. One of Jung's concepts is the two halves of life, where like in the first half of life, whatever period that means, we have a focus of proving ourselves, establishing ourselves, pushing ourselves, being enough, those kind of themes. And in the second half of life, it becomes more of giving back, making impact. Maybe there's a slowing down, but definitely a different view. I think maybe we see that in, thinking of characters like Chuck and Joel. I kind of, you don't really say this, but at least I might apply sort of that concept. You also talk about what Jung calls the puer aeternus, which I think I think translates to something like eternal child, which is another compelling and wonderful archetype, and that archetype may encourage us to push, go, keep taking those risks, keep getting out there, keep I know I have great enthusiasm and energy when I train and exercise with younger athletes, whether that's high school kids or the guys in their 20s. Like, man, it pumps me up, and there's something to be said for that. So we have these archetypes and these concepts, and it begs the question, as you say in the book, Devin, is the adventure worth it? what do you think? We got 5 more minutes. We can't answer that question, but what are your brief thoughts? Is the adventure worth it, Devin?
It's one of those questions that kind of idiosyncratic, right? It depends on who's fielding the question. For me, it became a big part of this because it was so benign what Brett and Cole went to do. And it was a version
Hmm.
of adventure, but it was on the surface a really predictable one. And then it became not. And it ended the way that it did in tragedy and also kind of miraculous, that Cole didn't die as well. And
Yeah.
I think so, as you know from having read this, while I was in the throes of reporting this very tough, sad story, very real story, a friend and I went for a quick ski ourselves in a very familiar place on the backside of Bald Mountain, 13 or above Breckenridge, where we live. And we skied a run that we've skied before and had like one of the best ski days of our lives on the year before around the same time. And so this was late April of 2022, and we triggered a relatively small wind slab avalanche, and that stepped down to a bigger persistent slab avalanche, and that then triggered from the flats below a much larger persistent slab avalanche, and then that ran full track, and that triggered an avalanche like I never want to see again. It was a half mile wide was the full scale of this thing, and 10 feet deep at the crown, and just this massive, completely unsurvivable thing that neither of us luckily were caught by and buried by, but it changed my life, and it made me reflect on that question: is the adventure worth it? Because I went up
Mm,
there to get my fix, like I have done since I lived in Colorado. Chased and tried to thread
yep.
needles and ski the awesome backcountry ski powder. Um, and in this case, I my boys were 4 and 7 at the time, and I realized ain't worth it anymore. Not in that fashion. Maybe it once would have
Yep.
been, but I realized that what I need out of my time outside is just to be out there, just to get that
Mm,
freeing feeling of being in the mountains, looking
yeah.
up at them, feeling this like awesome freedom that we get from being surrounded and living amongst public land, right? I didn't need the thrill anymore. I wanted it bad. I
Mm,
still want it as I'm
yeah.
sitting here talking to you. But I realized that that part of me that ship had kind of sailed. And it
Yeah.
really changed my whole perspective on what I'm doing and why. And I wrote about that avalanche for Outside Magazine, and kind of the end of that
Yep.
story was
Yeah.
like,
Great article.
watch out for what you want and why you want it, because it can lure
Yes.
you in. And then I realized that what I might have given up, which was everything, fatherhood, life, all the true foundational things that I want in my life, were put at risk by my want that day. And so I
Mm,
realized that I was confused, and I distilled that. It takes looking at yourself really hard in the mirror and being like, you don't need that, man. You just want it. And
yeah.
that has it's kind of guided my outdoor pursuits ever since. And certainly, Travis, reporting this story did the same. I saw so much pain from what happened at Uncle Bud's hut. And I saw kids who were going through life without their dad. And that's a real um, hard thing to see. And they showed
Yeah.
me how hard it had been for them. And that really made an impact on me and changed how I view kind of what I do as a dad as well. And so I think, is the adventure worth it? That varies by the day, by the person, by the pursuit that you're doing
Yep.
that day. But it's something that if you are really being honest with yourself, you should be asking yourself that question each day and relating it to exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And for me,
Yep.
that was the life changing part.
Mm. Wow, thank you for sharing that, Devin. I could talk for hours of everything that you're saying. Just it really resonates with me. My journey in life between in the past it was doing. I must do something very specific in order to have that feeling that I'm going for. to to get the fix. And it's been profound to start grappling with, well, what if I start with the feelings and the being and then bring that to the doing? And maybe at times it's the same doing, touching that edge, being on, touching the void as it were, that can still feel really good. And it doesn't have to necessarily be that if we if we start again with the being. So I don't know, maybe we sound like a couple middle-aged dads here, but for me it's felt good, and it's felt like growth. It's also been freeing, I think, in many ways. And I also even see, in, I've talked to a lot of Olympians recently from the Winter Olympics. I'm finding those athletes who start with the feelings, what are the principles and virtues and ways of being, if they pursue those as a foundation, it actually leads to the best performance, rather than saying I must have the performance in order to feel a
Mhm.
certain way or to feel enough. So yeah, I really appreciate it, Devin. It's made me think. I think it's again, it's a great book. I highly recommend it, listeners. I hope you check out The Way Out. I hope you check out Devin's other work. Devin, is there anywhere else people should follow you or see what you're up to, your next writing projects? We may just see up there, if you smell something coming from that toilet area. That's probably Devin up there with the pitchfork. But if it's not there, where else should we find you, Devin?
Oh man, it's kind of a constant hustle still. I am working on some other stuff, but it's such early stage that it's not even worth getting into. But
All right.
hopefully, someday it'll see the light of day. And yeah, it's sometimes stories find you. That's what happened with this one, and
Hmm.
the ones that I'm working on now kind of have as well. So I'm putting plenty of time into them, but I'm just not sure where they're all going to go. And otherwise, yeah, maybe I'll I'll bump into somebody at a hut. That has happened. I mean, I've bumped into people at huts this winter who've read the book, and we have good conversations.
Yeah, nice. Do you do social media or LinkedIn or anything if people want to check out your stuff there?
Oh man, I actually joined Instagram when this book came out at the behest of many people in my orbit. But I've only posted there once or twice. And otherwise I'm on Facebook, and it's all a little reluctant. Um, but it's part of our world.
Well, Devin, thanks again, man. Great talking with you, and just really appreciate your time. Have a good one.
Thanks, Travis. It's good to be with you. I appreciate you having me on.
Hey, folks, thanks as always for listening to Skimo Gold. This is the premier podcast for ski mountaineering interviews and race analysis, and in this case, an interview with an author. Big thanks again to Mr. Devon O'Neil. Devon, we appreciate your time. Great job on the book. A lot of hard work over many years. I think it came together very nicely. And audience, if you haven't read this book in print or in ebook or on audiobook, check it out. It's a fantastic read, and it just, like I said, it makes you think. And one of the things, I talked about this in the interview, I mean, it'll make you think about safety and preparedness, and how are you planning? What are you bringing with you? um who are you telling? What is your risk level? All of these kinds of things, I think they're especially highly relevant to the skimo community, because you spend a lot of time skiing uphill, going fast, doing the running and biking and other sports. We can gain a fitness level that can get us very quickly into places that are hard to reach, and we can forget that, because there are places that we go, almost every day, whether that's skiing, biking, running, whatever. I'm kind of talking to myself here. I spend a lot of time alone in these hard to reach places, and this book is a great reminder about doing that responsibly, and a little bit more planning and preparedness. So anyway, Devin, thanks for those reminders. Again, big thanks to the Salida community, to the Beasley family and the other families described in this book. I appreciate you. I also appreciate Palm Tree Podco. Thanks for the excellent production, for staying on me with the deadlines, the production, all that stuff. You guys make this happen. If anyone out there is looking for a podcast production company, please check them out, Palm Tree Podco. And of course, thanks to our sponsor, Camp. I'm using their stuff all the time, year round, all these different sports. It's great stuff. So be sure to check it out. All right, folks. Hey, have a good one. We will catch you next time on Skimo Gold.